breast cancer examination.
Ten beautiful and intelligent girls, one brand new Renault Captur, one crown. Who wins Miss Malaika Ghana 2016? Find out at the extraordinary grand finale on Saturday 22nd October at the National Theatre. Performing live, Miss V, Lil Shaker, Joey B and many more. Tickets to this exciting 5-star event are selling now at Charterhouse and X-Men for only 50 Ghana cedis flat. Miss Malaika Ghana 2016, produced by CH Live and proudly brought to you by Renault from Premium Motors, Kenya Airways, Lydia Contraceptives with support from GTP New Style, Abiam Institute of Technology, iTransport and our media partners. Miss Malaika Ghana, beautiful inside out.
If he looked a little closer, even at the
Fellow Ghanaians, Ghana is definitely facing an economic crisis as a result of mismanagement, incompetence, and corruption. And this manifesto is going to provide solutions to this economic crisis. Fellow Ghanaians, the NPP's overall vision for Ghana in this century is the creation of an optimistic, self-confident, and prosperous nation through the creative exploitation of our core competencies and operating within the democratic, open, and fair society in which mutual trust and opportunities exist for all. Our goal for the economy is simple. Fiscal policy implementation, as it stands now in Ghana, lacks three basic elements: absence of a transparent framework or institutional arrangements for providing quality fiscal information to the public, absence of an accountability mechanism that ensures that officialdom is held accountable in implementing optimal fiscal policies to guarantee the stability of the system, and absence of a well set up institution to ensure the credibility of fiscal projections provided by the government. To address this problem, fellow Ghanaians, to address the problem of current high levels of public debt and the risk of the country relapsing into the HIPIC category again, an NPP government will adopt and implement rules that anchor fiscal policy implementation. In this regard, an NPP government will pass a fiscal responsibility law to bring in comprehensiveness, accountability, transparency, and stability to the entire budgeting process. In this context, a fiscal council will be set up with appropriate legal backing to contribute to the accountability of government. Similar to the fiscal council, we will set up a financial stability council to bring to bear what they're going to do in the fiscal area, in the area of financial stability. Because as we stand today, our financial system is in crisis and 8 banks are on the verge of collapse. So we are going to set up a financial stability council. And so when we set up a financial stability council along with the fiscal council, then the 3 legs of macroeconomic stability will be institutionally grounded: monetary discipline, fiscal discipline, and financial sector stability. We'll bring these two together and we'll move this economy forward. In addition, the NPP will undertake financial sector reform and deepen our financial markets, promote financial inclusion, and enhance supervision and regulation of financial institutions, as well as move Ghana from cash towards an electronic payments-based economy. We will formalize the economy through the establishment of a national database using the National Identification System as the primary identifier.
Okay, you just listened to Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia outlining the NPP's plans as far as Ghana's economy is concerned. We're back here in the studio. I have Ibrahim Eje of the NPP and Patrick Stevenson from Imani, Ghana, to discuss this very important aspect of the NPP's manifesto. I'll start with you, Stevenson. The NPP says its focus is to move from economic management of from taxation to production, and they go ahead to make some very ambitious statements of cutting down a number of taxes. Do you see this as something that is feasible?
Well, so following up from, I think, the conversation we started yesterday, I mean, you cannot have any economy, as it were, that taxes itself into prosperity. And I think the last couple of years, if you look at the way the economy and the cycle that we have seen, at least from 2012, looks like we appear to have been constricted on the fiscal policy side of things. So you have a government that essentially is cash-strapped. I mean, this morning I was looking at a report from the IMF, for instance, which appears to suggest that they're calling on the government to cut back on the public expenditure because on the revenue projections they made in November 2015 for the fiscal year 2016 didn't, you know, they're not making that much money. So ideally they should be cutting back on the spending. But these are the things that some of us saw at the time. Now, once you have the fiscal basket that tight, then of course the government thinks around borrowing and then things around excessive taxation and in some cases borrowing. And so you have the tax somehow shoestringing virtually every other player within the economy. And so it's been a challenge for even government itself, because I suspect it would recognize it. But then once your hands are tied, your fiscal basket is very close, you really can't do much. Than you have seen some of the taxes that have been implemented. And the funny thing is some of them get implemented once you get a certain backlash, you know, from who the stakeholders are, or the people that are supposed to be paying these taxes, then the government withdraws. So when the NPP recognizes that the economy cannot be taxed into prosperity, we can't keep taxing ourselves so people make money, and they want to rectify that. Yes, sound strategy from get-go. But the concern that I have had, which is what I have consistently, you know, quizzed for, maybe other alternatives or maybe much more clarity in terms of information, and Ibrahim provided a couple of those yesterday, would have been, you know, once you get these reliefs, and I think maybe a part of it is because of the way we have equally, you know, organized our processes towards elections, where the political parties, i.e., will make these statements anyway before they start engaging. Because yesterday we were told Danko Akufo-Addo was engaging industry. What I would have thought would have been that, you know, that should have preceded the sort of conclusions that we're arriving at. So we're clear in our minds what that burden and where the taxes are going to be coming from. We know what the volume is. I was looking at another report this morning that looked at, you know, the sort of tax reliefs or tax systems that Hillary and Donald Trump are both, you know, putting across in the US. And right from get-go, it is possible to quantify because they placed, you know, certain numerics on where these taxes are going to be cut. So you know that somebody is going to cut taxes on the rich by, say, $1 trillion over the next 10 years, $1 trillion. And you know where the possible, you know, investments are going to be. Once you have that level of clarity, it would mean there's been some prior engagement and we have clarity around that sort of conversation. But in the absence of that, I have struggled, because once you begin to cut taxes across board, and we don't know, I mean, I'll presume that maybe once the party wins power, I'll have a lot more flesh to that. But that's been my challenge, because I see a gap that will be created in revenues. And the gains that you usually see from reduction in taxes, they usually take a certain lag before the results are seen. Because if I make tax savings as a business person, like I was saying yesterday, even if I'm supposed to invest that so I grow my bottom line, so even the marginal tax rates we have can generate the right revenues we're looking for, that will take maybe 12, 15 months. I don't know, I have not studied that, but it would definitely take some time for that to materialize.
Yeah.
So the short-term risks as a result of that policy intervention are quite real. And so how do we deal with that? If we are not careful, we'll get to a point where then looking for other alternative sources, like borrowing, becomes the only alternative, and you have the government's hands really tied, you know. And so that for me has been the challenge. But as we engage, you know, we've asked questions, I mean, right from Imani, you get clarity being provided. But I think on the issue of cutting back of taxes, we need to know in detail what will happen to the shortfalls that we get, because the government clearly is tight. Like I was saying yesterday, what you have to play with as government, if I look at the basket right now, it's very tight. So if anybody's making these promises, we have to know.
Yes, Ibrahim, you would tell us the how to, because on paper, of course, it looks good. You tell us the how to, but before then, how did you or the party arrive at the specific sectors that they would want to reduce taxes for, especially on import of machinery and medicines and all that? How did you pick those sectors?
Thank you, Fatty. The important thing, what we needed to do, we recognize that we are in crisis as a country, economic crisis. And the way to get out of a crisis is to stimulate growth. So we looked at certain things that are hindering growth, the things that are suffocating Ghana's ability to produce. It's from production that you get that productivity, which you can then tax. So we look, for example, at the special import levy bill. Now that's over 3 years, 2013, 2014 and 2015. What is this special import levy? It's another tax upon imported goods, and you pay it at the point of entry, and it's calculated or computed via the carriage, insurance and freight of the goods you're importing. And what's that's done to the Ghanaian businessman and woman is that it's made them uncompetitive in terms of within the region, because now, having paid all the taxes, then you're slapped with another tax, which is the special import levy bill. It's around 5%. I mean, that's a huge amount. 5%. And they calculate on the carriage means the total value of your container. The insurance, how much it costs you to insure, and then the freight. Freight normally is around $600, $700 to $1,000, depending on whether it's a 20-foot container or a 40-foot container. So this then makes goods expensive. And you've got to ask yourself, I was in Ilorin, Kwara State in July of this year, whereby certain goods, water and what have you, are a third of the price cheaper. There's a soft drink, which we all know, which in Ilorin, and it was the ShopRite, without giving any advertising, just so you can weigh it up. Here it costs us around 3 cedis or 4 cedis for that certain soft drink we all know. There in Nigeria, the equivalent was 1 cedi, 20 pesos. And of course, we can, with the technology now, people can check the things I'm saying. Anyway, the special import levy bill, because I want to answer your question, Fatty. What made us focus on certain areas? We know that agriculture is a key component of our economy. If agriculture works well, the economy works well, and the reverse is the same. And so in fact, the special import levy bill, one of the categories is fertilizers. Can you believe that the NDC government they have. There's a special import levy bill on fertilizers. So in order to, as I say, make agriculture work, which then connects to economy working, we're going to remove the special import levy bill on fertilizers. Let the farmer have the tools to actually work, both the financial tools and of course the machinery tools as well, but we'll get to that later on. Again, machinery and equipment, which again our businessmen need. The same Association of Ghana Industries that Nana went to see yesterday, they again are being strangled because the machinery they need to produce are being taxed. And who pays for it? Ourselves. That's why inflation, I mean, yesterday inflation has crept back up to 17.92%, a wrong trajectory, especially in an election year. And then all other goods except petroleum products also attract 2% special import levy bills. So these are the things that we looked at and said, hold on, in order to make the economy work, let's free up the obstacles to agriculture beginning to work properly. Likewise, machinery, because if there are pillars in our economy, it's industry, agriculture, and then of course we have the mineral resources that we have. And so what Nanado wants to do is to make sure that you give vim or fire to these key sectors. And the reduction, Fatty, of the taxes, Patrick was right. You know, when you reduce taxes at the top level, I'm talking businesses or well-to-do people. Generally, those whose net worth is very high, they have a higher propensity to save the world over.
Yes,
it's generally the case. Those at the lower rungs, we are more consumer-oriented.
Exactly.
So when you reduce taxes for somebody earning, for argument's sake, 400 or 500 cedis a month, and you reduce it, give them more take-home pay, they're more likely to spend it rather than to save it. It's a fact of life, the world over. So we're again reducing the 17.5% VAT that small micro companies, I mentioned yesterday, the barber, the tailor, the hairdresser, and so on and so forth, reducing it back to 3%. They then have more money to spend, and then it goes back into the economy, and that makes us more productive. Also, going into the industries, if you go to certain industries within Ghana, the industrial trading areas, you find that there's a culture of what we call overtime. The more you work, then you're paid more. Now, when you're taxed high, there's a disincentive to do overtime. So we're actually reducing the taxes, for example, the corporate tax from 25% to 20%, and then likewise for the workers, when you reduce the tax so that they have more net income, more people are then encouraged to do what? Work longer. Because now you don't work so long, and then your money just goes back into tax revenue or for the GRA, Ghana Revenue Authority. So it's these interventions that are going to stimulate consumer spending. Now, the more that we are spending and putting money back into the economy, that's where you find the vibrancy and then the economic growth. And I just want to say something before Patrick comes in. It's not just about cutting taxes. The other equation is to make sure that you reduce debt. Because what you do when you reduce debt and you lower taxes, that's where you have what they call aggregate demand. You have that space within the economy where it actually grows. Because if you reduce taxes and your debt is still higher, or you keep borrowing, there's no net gain. Because of course you reduce a little bit of your tax revenue, but in order to compensate that, reduce your borrowing. And as Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia mentioned, having that fiscal responsibility law and the Fiscal Council, what is it intended to do? It's intended to put benchmark levels whereby government will be targeted to reduce borrowing by a certain category. Again, when it comes to procurement at the national level, we talked about having a fiscal discipline, monetary discipline, okay? And those anchors are made to make sure that you have an internationally recognized market, whereby before we go and buy, for example, $1 million worth of iron rods for any infrastructure project, how much does that cost in the world market? So that check and balance helps to, again, reduce government spending. You have an internationally recognized, let's say, reference point. You don't just go sole sourcing, buy iron rods at $1 million. We know what happened with the Dambai Teacher Training College. Under the NPP in 2007, it cost 190,000 Ghana cedis. These are two colleges less than 100 meters apart in the Volta region. And then in 2011, it cost 950,000 Ghana cedis. I mean, it's like 8 times as much. Did cement increase by that quantum? No. Did iron rods increase by that quantum? No. Did inflation increase by that quantum? In fact, no, because there was a time when the NDC were touting single-digit inflation for so many months. So I'm just saying that these interventions are what will make reducing taxes beneficial to the economy. You'll find that Ghanaians can work, and then the job creation, that space that Nanado wants to create, having those industries we mentioned yesterday, a petrochemical industry to anchor job creation, pharmaceuticals, vehicle assembly, light industry. These are the things that Nanado, God willing, will do, and it will absorb a lot of the youth. We have nearly 300,000 graduates unemployed. And so these industries, and you can bet your bottom city, not dollar, your bottom city that Nanado, God willing, will do it. And the youth out there who are watching us right now know that indeed there is indeed hope. There is indeed a change coming in your economic circumstance, whereby there will be a space for you to apply your God-given talent to earn an honest wage for honest work done. And these interventions, intellectual interventions, well thought out, will create that space for Ghana to get back to work, and for Ghanaians watching us now to know that there will be a job for them come January 2017, inshallah.
Well, we'll come back to timelines, you know, how long it will take for you to start implementing all these, and in the interim or within the gap at which you're trying to achieve this, what is going to support our economy as you arrive at, you know, your ultimate goal. But I'll come to you, Stevenson. We know that Ghana is an import-driven country as things are now. Everybody is importing something. Scrapping the special import levy, do we risk, you know, getting some more import into the country than ensuring that our local industries, you know, work better?
So, I mean, to respond to that question, I mean, the student of economics in me tells me that, you know, that will depend on the sensitivity of imports, the volume of imports we have today, to that particular import, that particular import levy that's been in place at the moment. So that if it's very sensitive to it, then the removal necessarily should drive a certain volume of import. But of course, that is equally dependent on the sort of products that are being imported in the first place. As to speak, the economy today is not really producing anything. I mean, significant number of things that we need. You know, we've talked about production of domestic rice, for instance. At the moment, we're doing just about 30%. Yeah. After all the interventions we have, everything in the country today is trade-driven. If you look at the balance sheet of banks, who asset were supposed to provide finance to support the underlying economic activities that we have, I mean, the banks will generally prefer to finance somebody who's trading, buying and selling. You just write an LC somewhere, and then get, you know, once it's guaranteed that cash flow is fine, it's in business. So clearly it tells you that the economy looks a certain way, which you're right about. But the removal of those taxes would depend on the sensitivity and the volumes of imports of goods to which these are applied. My thinking is that, yes, it wouldn't necessarily open up a certain influx of importation. What it will create will be some level of comfort. Because bear in mind, if I'm importing, if for example I'm a manufacturer, I work in agri, I mean, and I need some equipment and tractors, which I know you have some compensation for when you import these things. I mean, when I import them, the fact that a certain levy of 5% is removed doesn't mean I import 2 or 3 of that. What it means is that that import levy, which I hitherto was translating into my final cost of production, would have removed. And that's the point. That's the point Ibrahim has been making. That it will create up a certain space so I can find ways by which I reapply, you know, that sort of tax savings. So if you look at it in itself on a micro level, i.e. who is benefiting directly from the intervention, whoever is importing or whoever is in a manufacturing concern, they make that savings. There's the other side of the equation, which immediately becomes that 5% revenue that you have lost in the basket because there's a certain expenditure that is charged on it on the moment. Take it or leave it. I mean, the basket as we speak today, like I've been saying since yesterday, is very tight. If the NPP is elected, even if we put the NPP and the NDC together as one government to run the country, okay, the stark reality is that public debt is standing in nominal terms 110 billion. You can't run away from that. No. The stark reality is that the revenue you're raising has got certain charges on that revenue that you can't do anything about. And that revenue, this import levy, is a component. So once we think of taking it out now, there's a certain charge immediately that creates a gap for us. Yes. So my thinking is, how do we block that? Yesterday you mentioned some of the things. I mean, we have all sorts of programs that appear, you know, somehow they look fictitious, so we can block those gaps. Yes, that could help to a point. So let's remove those levies. Yes, they will work at the micro level, in which case the government will gain, but the gains will come over a certain period, because as a farmer, well, you're looking at one farming cycle before the supposed, you know, returns that you get will come, right? Guarantee that he's investing that tax savings really into a productive activity, and he's not going to spend, like you say. I mean, for most of the people that are at the lower side of the income spectrum, you give us more money, we'll spend the money. We are not going to save the money, which is why some argue that cut taxes for top income earners. But that's a very ideological economic argument to have. So in our case, the stark reality is if we remove that, a gap immediately is created on the balance sheet of government today. Yes. And to deal with that gap has been the concern of some of us, because if you're not careful, then whichever government it is pushed to a certain wall. I mean, if you're paying attention to the debate and conversation around the economy today, hardly do you find the NDC talking about removal of taxes. They dare not. Yes. Because they know the existential pressures. They dare not.
Okay? So they will have all the nice conversations, tell you growth is smoothened over time, you know, they try to stabilize inflation at point. The stark is the stark reality, the fact that you have a certain pressure on your revenue. So we'll remove that, yes, farmer will benefit, whoever is importing will benefit, that's a given. But what happens to the gap that is created on the balance sheet of government as we speak today?
Yes. All right. So, Ibrahim, you would just take
I'll
over and answer that.
Sure. In fact, we can look to history. Let's look at 2001 to 2008 or 2009.
Right.
How much the NPP under President Kufuor received in taxes and loans. It amounts to 20 billion Ghana cedis. That's taxes and loans, the very product we're talking about now. Taxes and loans for the period 2001 to 2008, NPP received 20 billion Ghana cedis. The NDC, from 2009 to date, have in taxes and loans 248 billion. Look at the difference. Now, so you've got to ask yourself, hold on, with this much taxes and loans or revenue, that's what we're talking about here, about gaps and shortfalls. How is it that the NPP under President Kufuor was able to grow the economy from $3.7 billion to $28 billion? Yes. Okay. And then likewise, you had incomes increasing. In fact, the minimum wage under President Kufuor, in fact, in dollar terms, was $2.12. Under President Mahama right now, the minimum wage is $2.02. It's gone down with all the taxes and revenue. It tells you something. It's about how you manage the economy. And look at the time as well. Were nurses being paid properly? Doctors, teachers, you had the police service salaries increasing. It was around 146 Ghana cedis per month. It went up to 700. I don't know the rate now, but I'm talking 2001 to 2009. I'm sure the policemen are there, as they watch us, they can quickly call and confirm. What was your salary as of 2008 and what was in 2001? Why am I giving these historical antecedents, Fatty? Because it relates to what we're talking about. That can we manage an economy when you reduce taxes? And Patrick is totally right. There will be a drop. How do you manage that gap? But here's the thing. With practically 10 times less money, $20 billion to 248. Yet, in fact, right now we hear from President Mahama that the meat is down to the bone. CLOSAG have been on strike. The pharmaceutical service have been on strike. Nurses, teachers, and what have you. I mean, labor unions are going on strike, not because they want to, but because they are suffering. The cost of living is that high that they can't afford the salary that they're on. And so you have to ask yourself, why the difference? We had less revenue, because that's what we're talking about here now. How does NPP make up the revenue? But yet we had a higher standard of living, costs were lower in that sense, and the city was appreciating. So it's about managing the economy well. And as I mentioned earlier on, you do debt restructuring, where God willing, we'll inherit a bad economy like we did in 2001, but how do you manage it? When you do debt restructuring, because Patrick is right, these are sovereign loans, which whoever comes in, you have to honor, otherwise we'll find ourselves back at the international court. And we saw what happened with the Malaysians and what have you. So we have to pay it. There's no two ways about it. We can't just abrogate deals.
Yes, so, you're cutting down taxes. So we just want to know, how are you going to meet all these obligations and still run the economy? Very good.
First and foremost, by actually stimulating the economy, that will be a factor within it. Yesterday, I made mention of the fact that the Auditor General's report for 2012 and 2014 revealed that 5.9 billion cedis, say 6 billion cedis, cannot be accounted for, which means it went into the system, but now the system can't locate it. And how to put certain plugs there. Patrick is right in the sense that, yes, you can account for that, but that in itself cannot be the only answer. But it's an important ingredient in making sure that we control and manage our finances. Because once you plug those loopholes, we stop the monies being leaking out, whether through corruption, stealing, malfeasance, you know, all of these things that Nanado, inshallah, will do. It will help to make sure that we have that space to actually meet our commitments. Because can you imagine if we're able to get find that 6 billion, and President Buhari has been doing a wonderful job in Nigeria. Right now, we know that, I don't know the figure, so let me not state it and be inaccurate. But you're talking in the billions of dollars of money that is now coming back into Nigeria's Federal Reserve. Again, if we do the same thing here with honest leadership, accountable to the people. I mentioned earlier that, again, we're changing corruption from a misdemeanor to a felony. A felony now means that it attracts a custodial sentence. So there's that deterrence, not only for the politicians, but for the civil servants as well. If you don't want to go into Nsawam under Nanado Dankwa Akufo-Addo's presidency, because Nanado is putting the people of Ghana first. It's not our money. And that's what the message Nanado is letting the Ghanaians know. We know it's not NPP's money. It is your money. And so we are going to, as trustees, make sure that anybody who steals your money, the Ghanaian people's money, Nanado will make sure they are prosecuted. And that kind of deterrence will, God willing, enable that 6 billion cedis, I'm just giving as an example, to come back into the economy. And so it's these kinds of things. And then making sure that when it comes to public procurement and infrastructure development, we will not do sole sourcing without there being an emergency caveat. And we'll make sure that there's value for money. Again, we're going to have a body. That's part of the fiscal responsibility law that Dr. Bamia spoke about in the piece you showed earlier. Yeah. There will be a body. I can't just say, this water I'm supplying at $3,000. We'll go to the market, and if it's one city, it's the one city one that the government will procure. Of course, making sure that quality and efficiency criteria are met in terms of what we're procuring. So these kinds of things, Nanado is letting the Ghanaian people know that as an honest leader, he's going to put their interests first. And Nanado has said, if you think you want to come and make money in my government, forget it. There's no room for you. Your room is in the private sector. Go and work there. Here, it's honest leaders that we want, and honest executors of the Ghanaian purse. And these ingredients is what will make sure that the shortfalls that Patrick and yourselves rightly highlight, because there will be a gap. But how do you make that gap up? You plug where the leaks are, and then you breathe space into the economy by creating these anchors. The thousands of jobs that will be created in the petrochemical, the pharmaceutical, and indeed the vehicle assembly. Nigeria, since the 1980s, have been assembling Nissan plants in Nigeria. Even during the coup d'etat era, Nissan has been in Nigeria all this while. Why can't we do the same? And so Nanado will make sure we do it. And so graduates out there, young men and women out there, know that there is indeed an opportunity coming where you will have a meaningful job and an economy that is thriving under Nanado.
Ibrahim, we'll hold your thoughts. We'll take a break. When we come back, you give us timelines, because elections is just barely a month away, and you just have 4 years first for Ghanaians to decide whether to let your government continue if indeed you win the elections. So we'll talk about timelines when we return from the break.
The anointing oil is a physical material that transmits the supernatural divinity of God. If you are a child of God and you are not anointed, you cannot do it.
81% of the population of our country, maybe some of them live below the poverty line. When you drive through East Legon, that's not the real Ghana. The real Ghana are people who are there, who are very poor, who are needing help. And the mandate of the church is to help.
This finger has the ability to bind these 4 fingers together. So a true apostle should have the ability to operate in all the gifts. Under all the gifts.
Father, in the name that is above every name, I send forth your healing unto all those that are sick and those that are being bound by the enemy. I declare your freedom now in the name of the Lord Jesus.
You are too gifted to be wasted. You are too blessed to be a failure. Don't let anybody deceive you. No matter your status, God is still with you. This is God in me. And God says no matter what you are going through, He is always there to take you through the storm. God is our focus, and He is in you. He is the strength of your life.
You're welcome back to State of the Nation on ETV Ghana. I'm sitting in for Kwame Jan, and we are having a discussion about the NPP's manifesto, talking about taxation. And I have Patrick Stevenson of Imani Ghana and Ibrahim Ejay from the NPP. Patrick, what timelines will be feasible with these ambitious plans?
Okay, so I mean, it would have been easier to have answered that if I was a member of the NPP Economic Policy Formulation Team to provide you timelines. But I suspect Ibrahim will provide those details. But in my view, I mean, from a very objective point of view, given the sort of pressures that some of us see, I mean, I have come to a certain conclusion that the major political parties that we have running the machinery of the government today, given the structure of the economy, I don't see any drastic policy reform that all of a sudden changes the game in 2017. It's not going to happen. I mean, we'll be dreaming if it's going to happen. The reason I say that is policy hasn't changed significantly over the last 3 years. Look at directional policy. Yes, some of the reforms you have seen have been government-owned, financial management reforms. But in terms of what it has to do, like Ibrahim said, I mean, they're talking about taxes, how we cajole the private sector to bring it back to sustainable levels, how we fix issues around power supply. Yes, we have brought in extra budgets to increase capacity of generation, but we still can't have the power on for industries for a relatively stable period of time. In the presence of some of these pressures, you have gradually seen private sector productivity somehow recover strangely. What it tells me as an independent person who's watching the environment is that no matter what happens in the policy environment, private sector people learn to react and adjust, okay? And so the results we are seeing today are results, in my honest opinion, that have been the follow-up strategies for private sector people reacting after the lags of the challenges you've seen from 2013.
And not because of policy.
Not necessarily because of policy, because I mean, if power crisis heightened in 2013 and 2014, if you're an independent person who's running an orthopedic hospital, you would have looked for a plant because you need to be in business. So today, your output would have somewhat attained some level of stability, not because there's been a significant change in the policy environment. So now you're not going to depend so much on it. And it is dangerous to run an economy like that, because then you get private sector people realign themselves away from policy. Meanwhile, what you want policy to be doing is to get everybody in. If policy cannot predict everybody else's, behavior within the economy, then it becomes very difficult. And so, yes, these goodies we're hearing are great. I think if they are implemented, the results, in my view, will begin to trickle in 15, 16 months down the line. 2017 will not all of a sudden change the game. I don't see debt levels reducing significantly. I don't see debt to GDP significantly changing. I don't see prices of goods and services. I mean, inflation today we're hearing is what? Is in excess of 70% again. Yeah, and it's there because there were certain pressures that I find strange why nobody saw them, because as independent analysts who don't even have that level of data, I mean, you could see that clearly you're going to have, some existential pressure on prices, towards elections. You will necessarily see some reaction of private sector people going into a Christmas, right? Yeah. So if we can anchor these and really model them well, then we shouldn't have these challenges. But we have. Inflation all of a sudden is not coming to 10% in 2017. It won't happen. Cost of credit, the way I see it today, which is a mere function of availability of funds and the demand for funds, and the cost of funds in the banking industry, which you have seen a lot of, cacophony from the microfinance industry, which is somewhat filtered in there. You need reforms to fix them. 2017 won't deliver it, if we have to be very candid with ourselves. So the question now becomes, should we all look long-term or medium-term? If we're looking medium-term, who's offering us the better basket as a private sector player? When I look at it, I don't see the current government pursuing some of these aggressive reforms that the NPP is promising. I don't see how that's going to happen. They may try to manage it, but that's going to be challenging. However, if these initiatives that we are hearing in their very, edifying sense are things that can be done in the current dispensation of political economy we have around policy formulation and implementation, if we can do them, then maybe 2018, 2019, the outlook would be significantly different.
Well, Ibrahim, your party, you haven't really told us your timelines. We don't want a situation where you are in government and then you say, oh, give us 3 more months or give us 5. What are your timelines? Are we looking at after elections, a year on, 2 years on, 4 years on?
We plan, Fatty, to hit the ground running, as they say. For example, the reliefs from corporate tax, the 20%, 25 to 20% will be immediate. Again, things like there's a 5%, sorry, 17.5% on real estate. I'm talking Ghana real estate for the houses sold, the building industry, construction, 17.5%. Again, we're removing that. Why are we doing that? Because it then makes it more cheaper to build. When it's more cheaper to build, what happens? You can build more affordably. You can attract clients easier because the houses are cheaper, the apartments are more affordable, and it creates jobs. Now, they say that inflation is what? It's defined in the Keynesian terms as too much money chasing too few goods. That's how they define inflation. So the trick then to avoid inflation is to make sure that you are productively working as a country. Now, the one district, one factory, these are the interventions that Nanado say, God willing, will do. One district, one factory. We have 216 districts in Ghana. 500 on average. A factory by any definition should be around 500 workers. Why do I say so? I mean, you need the workers, the drivers, the cleaners, the cooks, ancillary workers. It's not just the amount of people in that square called factory, but in and around. There'll even be, you know, maintenance people, electricians, plumbers, you know, let's say around a community of 500 people working in a factory. 500 times 216 districts, Fatty, is 108,000 jobs. That's the hope and the vision that Nanado is giving to Ghanaians right now. And that will happen, as we say, bientôt or sesia. Why do I say so? Because it's not about thinking, how can we do this? Let's have a committee, spend, you know, 36 months before you build a factory. These days, factories are what we call plug and play, you know, whereby you can actually set down pillars and you use the corrugated iron pillars, and then you start your factory. I'm just speaking as a, you know, as a layman. I'm not saying these are the definitive structures, but just so Ghanaians can understand the passion that Nanado has to make sure that, as I said yesterday, Nanado wants to give Ghanaians a hand up, not a hand out. And so the one district, one factory, by any conservative estimate, that's 108,000 jobs, and it's going to be equitable. Because all the districts are across the nation. They're not all located in Accra or Kumasi, or, you know, 100 districts are located in Navrongo. It's everywhere. When you have national growth, it in fact creates that effervescence, that vim, that feeling of national can-do attitude. Because I think when we change the mindset, an environment has such a magical way of uplifting people's attitudes towards work and nationhood and statehood. So these are the things that will happen in that area. And I refer to the one district, one factory, and I also want to add the $1 million, one constituency. That again is there. Now that is coming from the capital expenditure budget. It's already there. But what happens? Right now under NDC, it gets lost in that consolidated fund, which goes to what I mentioned earlier. 5.9 billion cities can't be found because they mix it up. The capital expenditure budget, from which we've taken, it's actually 1.6 billion cities. What Nanado is proposes to do is just to take 275 million $275 million from that, and then give it to the constituencies. Now, it will come within the ambit of the district assembly. So it's not like the constituency is spending.
So the districts are going to have the factories, and then they are going to have 1 million. What exactly is the 1 million
Good.
for?
The $1 million is what we call the Infrastructure for Poverty Eradication Program, IPEP. I'll repeat, Infrastructure for Poverty Eradication Program. Now, this is where you're putting real politics at the local level. I remember when I used to live in the UK, we had a town hall meeting. Any project that, I used to live in the London Borough of Hounslow, before that the London Borough of Chiswick. And what we used to do is it was not by invitation. You can either decide to disassociate from the town hall. There'll be a meeting to say we want to do this particular clinic, this particular road, or this particular bridge. And then the residents of the council, we, the tenants, would go there. It's not by force. And then you vote. The councillors that we elect, which are the assemblymen and women, you vote. And the majority carries the day. Of course, you have experts who bring the proposals to you and we vote. That's local politics at work, and that's what Nanado is doing here. We're going to make sure that that $1 million is there. The district assembly, remember, the member of parliament by law is also a member of the district assembly. But you'll have we the people coming to say that in my area of Lejokuku, what we need, which is Teshi, we need not a bridge, but we need to build a boat building factory.
Okay.
Okay, because we know that our sea is our cocoa. We are a fisher folk people, so now let's try and create vertical and horizontal growth. Not just fishing now, but now we can actually build modern trawlers that we can maybe sell down to Axim or Togo. I'm just sounding out some ideas. You can do the same in Brongafo, Navrongo, Hamele, Sogakope. If you go to Bato or Sege, every community knows what that $1 million can be used for. So over the first 4 years, Fatty, that's $4 million. Which normally under an NDC government gets lost. But here, you know, $4 million. Can you imagine the community, your auntie, your uncle, those who want to, it's not by force, come and actually be part of the decision-making progress and saying that of all these interventions, let's put our money here. Now, what does that do? That's job creation. When you create jobs, you're increasing the opportunity to tax productivity. And again, it's these things that we are now clawing back money into Ghana's economy nationwide.
All right.
And when you have equitable growth, you find that Ghana succeeds.
Our time is almost up, but let me just ask this. Even with all the high taxes, there are leeways and go-arounds, and people are still refusing to pay taxes or, you know, getting away without paying taxes. Right. How are you going to ensure that with your little taxes, they actually come to the coffers, the country's coffers? Let me start with Patrick.
Well, so we have tax avoidance and tax evasion. I would want to deal with both, you know, because...
But I understand we have 2 minutes, so you
we have
take one.
Okay, so, I mean, essentially, what you find happening in our case is that you have governments that are planning social programs in healthcare education for people they don't know. When I say they don't know, I mean, the beginning point, like he said, you know, he makes reference to some local level political organization and decentralization that happens in elsewhere. I mean, there's another theory that's developing from somewhere in Lisbon, Portugal, where the ideas, even before they get to the short list of 3, the people of the community will have to decide, then justify them. So in those places, people vote for ideas, they don't vote for people, okay? And that's another way I think we can start thinking about decentralization process. So that way, the government or the system can identify who it's planning for.
Yeah.
Because the person has got to pay tax for you to be able to provide that public good for them.
Yes.
And so you need, and I heard that clearly, something concerning identification, right? It's the basic thing we can do. I mean, some countries did it 500 years ago. I'm not too sure why we keep struggling as we speak. We have all sorts of identification systems all over the place, no harmonized database to identify anybody. And that has been a major problem for us as Nimani. We had provided, I remember 2 years ago, a 15-bullet point of how this has got to be done. Identifying people with certain PIN numbers using existing technology so nobody evades tax. Now, what that does is it takes away the incentive for people to be corrupt. Because one reason why people will not want to pay taxes is because they can't trust the taxes getting into a certain basket. And one study we did suggests that, you know, the way we mobilize taxes, collect from the local level, send it to the central port, and disperse for projects to be done. 40% of it gets lost going up, 60 gets lost coming down, 48% on every CD is lost. If you take 1 Ghana CDs today, it is possible they are going to lose 48 pesos on it before you actually start implementation. That's a challenge that has to be fixed.
Yeah. Ibrahim, your final word.
I want to thank Patrick for that last intervention because it's within the manifesto.
Oh, it is?
Yeah, the data identification system. You know, we completed most of it by 2007. I went and registered with the biometric, and the national ID cards to date have not been issued. It's within our manifesto. Within the first year, we will make sure that that system is there. That's a timeline that is captured within the manifesto. Within the first year, first 12 months, that national ID system will be there. That will provide, and it will be harmonized. We're going to link it to DVLA, to the police, prisons, and the banking system as well. So it will allow other institutions to plug in. And when you do that, you can then identify that, hold on, Ibrahim Ajay, we know you do XYZ job. but we as a government, we can't see your TIN, your tax identification number on certain expenditures. These are the things that will help us to harmonize and move away from a cash-based system to an electronic payment system. And I think what we plan to do under Nanado's government, inshallah, is to make sure we utilize present-day technology. Most people have a mobile phone, and of course more are now having mobile money. So again, you find that you can plug on present-day technological advances and harmonize it with the national identification system to identify who's paid what and who hasn't paid what.
Well, thank you very much, Ibrahim Ejay and Patrick Stevenson, for your time tonight. That's where we end the show. My name is Fatih Shaibu Ali. Hopefully, Kwame will be back on Monday. Have a good night.
To be wowed as the 6th Radio and Television Personality Awards comes up live at International